Welcome back to another episode of Come to the Table. This is episode 3, where we are looking at the sermon that was written on November the 9th.
Yep. November 9th. That's
November
correct.
9th, where we take a look at Job. But before we get into that, we are here again joining you, and I'm here with Mr. Mike Sims. Mike, how's it going?
It's going good. Good. I know we're a little bit behind, but the life gets busy on us. So.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any less busy anytime soon.
I think they call that the holidays.
Yeah, the holidays, full of joy and aggravation.
And a little bit of stress out there.
Yeah, stress and joy.
Yeah.
But hopefully not in equal measure. Hopefully more joy than stress.
You hope.
That's for sure. That is the hope. But yeah, we're talking about the sermon from a couple of weeks ago where we discussed Job chapter 19, verses 23 through 27. I'm going to go ahead and read the scripture passage for us so that we can all get on the same page, and then we'll dive right into it. So the scripture says, "Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead or engraved in rock forever. I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another." So, what were your thoughts, Mike?
Well, Job is one of those parts of the Bible I struggled with a lot. I don't think I'm alone. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from, the whole God and Satan together, making a bet, reminds me a little bit of Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd, where they're betting $1. So, you go through that, you got that part. Then you go through, what Job goes through and keeps his faith. You got the lesson with his friends that are around him, blaming, coming up with blame, who is doing this, and not really listening to him, just trying to tell him what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
His losses that he goes through, and it's a very, I read it several times. In some aspects it's very repetitive, because it talks about the same thing, sometimes chapter after chapter after chapter. Could have been a lot shorter, but sometimes I know that we need to be told the same thing over and over. So one of the things that in trying to study Job, and I kind of want to go in this direction, is is it a true story, or is it, I don't want to say, you used a word that Sunday, I don't want to say a fable, or but a something that's handed down as a story year after year after year, until it gets to, I mean, what's your thoughts as far? I mean, it's in the Bible,
right? Well, and that's the confusing part. If I remember correctly, years ago, not that many years ago, but some years ago, I was here and I think I preached about Job, and I mentioned this as kind of like an afterthought, as a side thought, that this is, I think the best way to term it would be a morality story, a story that's given not for a sequence of events, not for the narrative, but for the lessons that it gives. And so I said it's like a tall tale or a myth that we pass down, where we try to teach values through those things. And I remember, I think you stopped me like after church that Sunday, and you were like, "Wait a minute, what?"
Yep.
And I was like, "Oh, yeah." Parts of that is because we know surprising little about Job. compared to other books, even other books in the same area, such as Jeremiah and stuff. We know a lot more about the authorship and where it came from. Job is kind of ethereal in how it's approached. But more than that, there's a lot of things that you mentioned that happen in this book that we don't see any evidence of anywhere else in the Bible, such as the divine council of so forth, or the devil and God just kind of chatting and making bets about people. And it's important to recognize that the time period that we do put on this is somewhere around the Babylonian exile. And if you think about, for a people, how hard that must have been to lose your home, to be uprooted and taken somewhere else, to be told that your religious practices, most of them, have become illegal and you need to start doing them in secret if you're going to do them at all. Not to mention just how you ordered your life is completely different now. It begins to make a lot more sense on why a morality story like Job would exist, because they're trying to talk to the people and say, this is how you handle extreme loss. This is what you do in the face of hopeless pressure. Nobody's sitting around counting down the days when they get to go back home, because they have no idea when that's going to be, if it ever comes. And really what they're trying to hold on to is hold on to their cultural identity. And that's very difficult, because the Babylonians were very good at subduing people and making them citizens of their empire, but really taking away your home. And when you don't have a home, you don't have something to fight for.
Right.
So I feel like this is the Israel's hope. This is the Jewish people's attempt to hold on to their identity. And so I think this is a fireside tale. This is kids gather around. I'm going to tell you a story about where we come from and the God we serve, and the story applies to the tremendous pressure that each and every group felt as they were trying to hold on to their identity. So we look at Job's loss, and when you understand that the people who were first telling this story, and it might very well have been based off of something, most tall tales and fables are, but it took on its own life around the fireside because it had a purpose, it had an intention behind it. And the intention of it is really what I focused on in the sermon, of kind of the idea that we are in a bad spot, that you can be really hurting, really lost. And God's aim, God's plan, so to speak, is to reclaim you, is to come and reclaim you from that place where you were. And the thing I like about it is so much of our modern American Christian vernacular kind of talks about the battle's already won. And I think there are distinct times where we kind of look around and say, okay, well, it doesn't feel won.
No, definitely not.
I still see some skirmishes happening around me. And I feel like Job, and the message behind Job, speaks very clearly to us about how it's not a done deal about how your suffering, your grief really does matter. God just isn't going to leave you in it.
Right.
And he doesn't leave Job either. Now, we kind of move past how he lost his kids, and then he just gets new ones at the end.
Yeah, that's that. There are many pieces of this book that are hard to reconcile.
Right.
It's hard to reconcile God making a bet, with Satan over whether this individual is going to keep their faith if you take everything away. I think sometimes as human beings, we kind of identify with that. Isn't it easier when things are going bad? Okay, God, did you make a bet or what? Can you just kind of, work through that bet and just win win the bet,
Can you
so
win
I
the
can
bet,
get back to
please?
what I was doing. That's hard. That's hard to reconcile because no, you don't see that anywhere else. And and yes, the whole part about losing all of his kids. Okay, I get it. I can lose a camel. I might have had a favorite camel, but I can lose my camels and replace them with other camels. I can lose my sheep. Maybe I had a few favorite sheep, but I can lose my sheep and replace them with other sheep. But these are kids. They're so when you read it, if you read it for face value, you just can't take your kids and replace them with a whole nother set of kids and be okay with that.
Yeah, that part of Job is a very Old Testament time period evaluation of things. And it really doesn't translate into the modern era
Nope.
because, but it's again, it's interesting because that's so very different. Like God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, and he takes him up there and he's weeping and gnashing his teeth the whole way. He's like, I can't do this. This is impossible. Why would you ask this of me? And it's like Abraham has great value for Isaac, and his loss, I'm 100% certain if God hadn't stopped him, it would have broke him.
Right.
And that's so different from this.
Yeah, Job's like, okay, well, I got a new set of kids. I maybe had problems with
Just
the
get
old set
some
of
new
kids.
ones. I don't know.
It's like, okay, but you look at this from a standpoint of somebody that's new to the faith or new to Christianity and sit down and they read and they read this and it's like, well, wait a minute. How am I reconciling this whole story here?
Exactly.
This is a little bit out of something I can believe that happened.
Job is a great example on how we need to be mindful and careful about even when we read scripture, because the great Saint Augustine, the early father of the church, one of my favorite quotes of his is, the Bible is shallow enough for a baby to play in and deep enough for an elephant to drown in. And that exemplifies that shows, and it's very clear in this passage how we read it and we just don't understand. And I would say that's a really good litmus for you need to research more.
Right.
If you read something in scripture and it doesn't connect so much that you're like, what is this?
Well, and this would be one that you would definitely have to step back and say, okay, this is not translating to 2025 very well.
Well, and like I said, with Abraham and Isaac, I don't think it translates to back then either. But what it does translate is it puts Job in a category that anyone in exile who is reading it, in American history, we have the whole Trail of Tears thing where we take the Native Americans and we move them across the country, and many die along that path. It would have been a similar story for the Israelites being moved in the Babylonian exile.
Right.
And so they would have lost family members. They would have lost children. They would have lost everything. And all those people read Job, see Job, they would have heard Job. They wouldn't have wrote it. All right. They see this story and they identify with it. They understand implacable loss. And so their next question is anyone in grief's next question, which is, when will it end?
Right.
How long? How long do I have to deal with this kind of pain? And again, the mode of Job, what Job's trying to teach us is that in this story, unlike anywhere else in scripture, God voluntarily gives control of Job's life over to the devil. But then he reclaims it. He comes in and he says, I'm come to reclaim you. You belong to me. I mentioned the whole Redeemer vocabulary is something I think I said in the sermon that we take for granted in Christian circles. But the entire concept of Redeemer looks more like you sold an item to a pawn shop and then you go to buy it back.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, very applicable for us in that sometimes we feel so lost, so hurt by the things going on around us. This acknowledges, Redeemer language acknowledges your pain. Well, I think the victory is already won. God is in control. God has a plan.
Mhm.
That language, although it doesn't immediately remove it, it does sometimes feel like you really should just get over it because it's not that bad.
Right.
And it's like, it feels that
Yeah.
bad to me.
Well, if you look at everything that Job went through, that I would say that was pretty bad.
It was
you
pretty
know.
bad.
Well, let's look at, because you had talked about, I think that line was "My Redeemer lives," and that is something that Job is saying to who. So let's put it in context where that part of that scripture is coming from.
Well, you said the repetitive nature of Job
Mhm.
shows up a lot.
Yes.
And Job has this conversation with his friends, with his wife, with pretty much anyone who is around him. And interestingly enough, funnily, he has this conversation with God as well, where Job is so hurt and has lost so much that he kind of defends his faithfulness against God, which I think is the most interesting part of Job, where Job stays faithful to
Mhm.
God the whole time, but God, for lack of a better word, accuses him at the end of, you're just hiding behind your faith at the end here.
Mhm.
You're not trusting me to come in and save you. You're doing it because you've said it to everybody.
Right.
And if I could identify with anything, it's, you pick a hill to die on and you
Right.
just plant your flag and you can receive all the new information in the world. And you're like, nope, I'm not listening to you. Job is kind of like that and is arguing with God. But his faithful statement here, as we read it in chapter 19, I know that my Redeemer lives, is a speaking against all of that. You should find the blame. You should curse God. You should yell at the heavens and say, why have you done this to me? And again, the meaning behind the word redeemer and talking about being reclaimed, Job is holding on with his nails to the idea that God will come and save him from this mess, that this torture that he's found himself in. So this is the reply. This is you should yell at God, you should curse God. And Job's in a way kind of saying, God's coming to save me. I can't, what else do I have if I curse God?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's when we look at the other part of that, when he's dealing with his friends. One of the lessons that I learned, as far as, is they just don't stop talking. They just don't stop and listen to what he's saying. They're trying to. I don't know if it's even fix the problem, as much as tell him what his problem is. And in doing some of the studies, one of the things that came out was this idea that you just sit back and listen rather than keep talking. And he's got 3 friends, and that's all they do. And that's part of the repetition of Job is these friends and what they keep saying and what they keep telling him over and over and over again. And I think that's we get to a point where we want to fix things. We see a problem, we see somebody hurt, and we see something, somebody going through a rough time, we want to fix it. Where we need to learn, and I put myself in that basket, is to just listen. Sometimes you're just looking for somebody to listen, not for somebody to fix the problem, because there may not be an immediate fix. I don't know if there was an immediate fix for Job. He had his faith. I'm not sure how much faith that his friends had, how much faith his wife had. But he had faith, so it wasn't anything to fix. But they couldn't get out of their own way, to be able just to listen.
Well, that's a great point, because the whole accountability factor. I
Mhm.
think and we'll get into this a little bit here in a minute, but like it's more than the blame game. It's like they're looking for yeah, they're not trying to help, they're trying to move to the next stage.
Right.
Stage 1 is you've been hurt, stage 2 is who hurt you,
Mhm.
stage 3 is how do we get them to hurt,
Right.
stage 4 is now that they're hurt and feeling real sorry for themselves, how are you going to pull whatever resources you need from them in order to rebuild what it is that you've
Mhm.
lost.
Right.
And it's almost so focused in at this one particular meeting point that it lacks the notice of how life is a journey and there are things that come from these things.
Mhm.
And they're really focused just on completing the next stage.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, they're okay. Where is the justice in this? Where do we go to get our pound of flesh, so to say?
Well, and I'm glad you used that word justice, because God's justice in all of Scripture has a tendency of subverting our expectations.
Oh yeah.
And it makes you really wonder what our impression of justice is compared to God's, because again, justice seems to, for us, really fall on this measure of um, hurt happens, whose fault is it? And then they pay.
Mhm.
And then justice has been done. But that leaves out God's most important step, which is the redeemed life of the person who was hurt to begin with.
Right.
There are hundreds of accounts, millions of accounts in history of people saying that they get their so-called revenge and they don't feel any better.
Right.
And although I don't feel like I've encountered grief anywhere on the level of Job, as far as I can tell, that's true. Somebody hurts your feelings, if you get them back real good, you don't feel like your life is any different than it was before. You
No.
still feel embarrassed when people make a joke about this thing that happened to you.
Right.
And it plays into how God, when we talk about things like the Beatitudes from Matthew, blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the earth. It's not blessed are the poor, for they're going to get all the cool stuff that the rich people have,
Right.
and then they will finally feel better.
Right.
It's their needs will be met.
Right.
We're going to lift them up. And justice, I think, for God's message, again, I can't think of a scripture that disputes this. It's more about the victim than the aggressor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that Job's friends certainly don't understand.
No, they don't understand, and they're not alone. I mean, today we do the same thing. If somebody hurts me or does me wrong, I want to see my justice. Yeah, I know God's got His justice. I want to see mine. I know what will make me feel better and what's going to make them feel worse. And you really have to.
Yeah, as we were just saying, you're wrong.
Right.
Right. I know what will make me feel better, right, despite the countless evidence that tells me that it will indeed not make me feel better.
It's not going to make me feel better. Exactly. And we go through that. It's like, yeah, okay, well, that didn't really feel like I thought it was going to feel, or now I feel bad for them because that happened. But that, it's so, and I think it's, I don't want to use the word maturity, but I think it's a process that we have to learn that, you
need good experience with it.
Right. Right.
Like how you need to have lived in a situation where you didn't seek revenge because you knew it wouldn't make you feel any better.
Right.
And have it work out.
Right.
Where you achieve a sense of peace.
Right.
You achieve a sense of moving on and you're not held back by this past trauma.
Right.
And you get to experience that. And if you can tell yourself the next time, what I'm looking for isn't payback, it's
right.
Pay forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that was a big part of the sermon, was the whole the conquest of blame
Mm-hmm.
that we go down. And honestly, I think this is so hard because it's not only human nature, sinful nature, to seek that vengeance, to seek that revenge, but I think it's also culturally just instituted in us. I was talking about, and this was a thought I had while I was preparing the sermon. I cannot think of listening to a news story or reading a news article where they don't, point A, explain what happened. Point B, here's whose fault it is.
Mm-hmm.
Here's who really messed it up.
Right.
And it just, culturally speaking, I think we live in that circle where point two is, whose fault is this?
Yep.
Not, oh, this is bad, we should try to help
Right.
who this happened to.
Right.
You know, Hurricane Katrina happens. Whose fault is it? I mean, it's a hurricane, but we checked the levees, we checked the
we're gonna try to put blame
emergency
somewhere.
systems, we
Right.
checked all the things that failed, and there were a ton of things that failed, but it's like, this literally cannot be anything other than an act of God,
Right.
as insurance people like to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we're still looking for who to blame.
Yep.
Oh, it's George W. Bush's fault. And it's like,
oh yeah,
do all presidents come in and check the levees? Like, I'm and it could be his fault, but that doesn't help the people of
Right.
New Orleans. That doesn't.
Well, and that's what we got to get to. That yes, there's something that happens, and yes, we want to blame, but it doesn't really get us anywhere.
Exactly.
And I'm not telling you I'm it happens to me. I do the same thing. Something goes wrong. I want to find blame. That way, I have an object that I can point at, or a person, or a thing that okay, that's why this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it just happens. And I think that's why when you look at how Job is set up, with it being this chat between God and Satan about Job's faithfulness. Well, what happens to Job is put the blame on this scenario. And I think that as when we read it, and as human beings, we look at that like, okay, well, there is a blame. There is someone or something to blame. And we like that. That fits into how we think.
Mm-hmm.
It fits into what we want to see. Okay, now what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the rest of the story is we got to have faith. And eventually it worked out for him, as far as the story goes. But he went through a lot to get there and had to keep that faith through everything that he was going through.
Exactly. And that's yeah. Job would say, and I think we would all agree, it doesn't help you at all when you come to the conclusion, well, this is the devil's fault. And it's like, all right. But again, God doesn't leave it there. God's not interested in leaving it there. And just as it was super important for the people in the midst of exile who had lost everything, including loved ones, it's not helpful for us to tell people going through crisis, God's here, God has a plan.
Mm-hmm.
What's more helpful is God sees your pain and is going to deliver you from it. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't exactly know what it'll look like.
Right.
But it's an acknowledgement of what you're going through, as opposed to a test, a trial,
right?
All the fancy language we like to use on those things. It's like, this is a test of your faith. It's like, why?
Right.
Why?
Right. Well,
why do I need to be tested?
And that's what the whole story of Job is. It's a test of his faith.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a bet between God and Satan, or however they want the story to read, that's basically what it comes down to. It's a test of his faith throughout the entire story. And one of the things that you had said, you had mentioned during your sermon, your pain, your story is real. And that regardless of what happened, and I think that's something that over time I've had to learn. It's whatever it is, it's real to you. I may look at it and think it's nothing, whatever, get over it, move on, be like Job's friends, just what are you doing? But you got to acknowledge that regardless of what the circumstances are, that's real. You know, it's, your story, your pain, and you got to acknowledge that is a real thing for somebody.
Well, and I think, and this is a theme we're going to be talking about a lot soon, with Advent starting and Christmas season getting underway, is the entire concept of hope and the way that changes how you interact with what you're dealing with. The difference between, look how terrible all this stuff is, there is no hope in the world, versus I know that my Redeemer lives. It changes the entire ballgame on how you interact with the trouble that you encounter anew today. Someone in a place of extreme grief who can get up in the morning and say, this is probably going to be a really hard day, a really hurtful day, but I know that God's doing something. I know that God sees me where I am, is an entirely different outlook between the two, simply because of hope. And it challenges how you interact with everything that you're going to see. I always get very nervous for people when they are sure that they can't get any lower, because not only in most cases can they, but also more than that, it suggests that they aren't looking for the good things anymore, and so
Right.
they're gonna miss them. One of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, talks about how in our current culture we really like to mask the pain. She calls it, I think she calls it like the Tylenol complex, where you take these things to dull the pain, but we rarely realize along the way about how much we're dulling the joy too.
Okay.
We're blocking ourselves off from receiving in general. And sometimes that makes a lot of sense when we've gotten hit a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
But we've also walled ourselves off so that we're not receiving any new inputs, joy, hope, people caring. Sometimes you talk to someone who's in a really dark place and you're like, I'm here for you if you need me. And you see it on their face. They write you off immediately.
Right.
They're like, okay, sure.
Right.
You don't understand what I've gone through. You don't. Right. And it's like, I don't.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I'm not here for you.
And it's, it's very difficult when you're in that place, when you're in a bad state, to see that, there are people out there. I mean, it's hard. The praise team does a song by Casting Crowns called "Praise You in the Storm," and it starts out, something along the lines is, I just can't hear you, I can't see you, and it's not just God that you can't see; it's the people around you that want to help you, and it's very, very difficult to see that, and it's somewhere someone reaches through that storm and just grabs you by the hand and says, I'm here. And I think that's one of the things, one of the points that you made on that Sunday was that we're not alone. And I think that when you're in those places, and you look at Job, I'm sure he kind of felt alone. These people that were around him were not helping him.
Right.
Or at least they were, it didn't feel like they were, they think they were helping, but didn't feel like it was. But, you get into these places, these dark times that, you don't see those people, and you don't, you're just trying to get through the storm.
Now that you say that, that makes me think, this is a completely new thought, but let's say, for instance, that this book was written by Job. How possible is it that his interpretation of his friends and his wife are not accurate?
Well, yeah. Could be.
That this is what he hears them saying versus what they're actually saying. Like, they just keep coming and nagging me and telling me I should be doing this and this and this, and they don't get it.
Right.
And it's like, how close of a parallel does that have to times of grief in your own life where people try to help and you just slap their hands away and you're like, I don't want to hear it. You don't even know.
Right.
Back off.
Right. And you get the mentality that you're going to get through this yourself. I mean, it's
The whole
that,
bootstraps.
right. Yeah. It's, wipe some dirt on it, pull yourself up, whatever. And I'm going to get through it. And you don't realize, you just don't realize where you're at. I mean, I was in that place, and you just don't realize, you don't hear it. You're kind of just walking through life trying to get through, and
you don't want to hear it.
You don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to get through it. Leave me alone.
Exactly.
I'll get there. But, and it's, not till, I want to say almost to the point where you're just giving up. And finally the little light kind of peeks through, and, and that hand reaches out and you reach back.
Well, and this is why I think it's so important for us to foster and build these kind of connections where we let people in before we're in the time of crisis.
Right.
If we can let someone into our lives who can look at us and say, look, you're just being unreasonable right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You're just choosing to ignore anything helpful because you're sure that the world is so bad.
Right.
You're only accepting the bad at this point in time.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And if you respect them enough have them say something, and maybe not in that moment, but in general, you hear it, that's so important.
Right.
For me, Jessica really is the only one who can break through my walls when I choose to have my walls up. And that's to my shame, because we have an entire community here at United Pres full of people who we have different roles, we have different things that we do, but that doesn't mean that we're not there for people in different places.
Right.
And I know that's why my mother enjoys the praise band so much. She loves playing, but more than that, she loves the community.
Right.
She loves the brother and sisterhood that's a part of that.
Right.
I know the choir is very similar, and I know the people who work as volunteers in the pantry also have a very similar outlook on things.
Well, you get our Sunday schools are the same way.
Sunday schools.
We have, quite a few adult Sunday schools. It's not kids Sunday schools, but, adult Sunday schools. And that's where, you get that community, you get that camaraderie together, and that's part of what church is. I mean, there's a lot of what it is: music, sermons, message, opportunities to study, whatever. But, on Sunday morning, you're all coming together.
Right.
And everybody's got different things going on, and, and everybody's got a different relationship. There's some people you're closer to than others, but, that's the community. That's when that storm happens. That's the people you need to listen to. Not easy. Don't get me wrong. It is not easy.
Not easy.
When that storm is happening.
Something that we should work on before, during, and after the storm. Kind of tell yourself, I need to put people who I respect around me. Not I respect they're good enough. I respect that they can slap me around a little bit and tell me that I need to get over myself.
Yeah.
Even though they recognize that I really am hurting at that point in time.
Right. Well, it's to be able to reach out and have the wherewithal to reach back. Because sometimes we get in that storm and we just don't. I'm here. I'm gonna get out. Don't worry. You just, kind of like that. What is it? That joke where God keeps sending a boat, a helicopter, and everything. I'm gonna make it.
Well, you end up dead and in heaven, and you're like, God, why didn't you come save me? And he's like, I sent you a radio message, a boat, and a helicopter, and you ignored it all.
Yep, exactly.
Because you were expecting a magical light from heaven to save you.
Expecting a miracle, I guess, and we had them, we just didn't see them.
Exactly. So, isn't that the truth?
Well,
the nature of sin is expecting something,
right?
And it just gets so twisted you don't even see it while it's going on by.
And that's exactly what happens when we're in the middle of those crises in life, is we just don't want to see what's out there.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or ideas on this particular topic?
No, I think basically, went through everything that I've got, questions for, as far as, the sermon. It was a good one. As soon as I heard it was on Job, it's like, okay, I got some questions.
Time to lock it.
I don't need to bring a lot of material. I got this.
Yeah, Job really supplies the what's up with that material by itself. And there is a nifty dance between acknowledging that something is ancient, and so different values, different cultural expectations. But there is a certain level of, if it just so diverges from your point of view, I think it is okay to look at scripture and say, you lost me there. And maybe it's because there's more to learn, but maybe also it's because it's lost itself in its own narrative, and Job could certainly be accused of that. That would be an interesting conversation. They didn't put us in charge of what goes in the Bible and what doesn't.
Well, you do wonder why this is in there. I mean, as far as, yes, it's a good lesson and stuff, but it's like, okay, this is one I have spent many hours on, and some of it is just trying to reconcile what's going on within this story. So, but yeah, you would like to talk to the people at some point. Okay, why did that make it?
Yeah, on the particular topic of encountering someone who's going through that kind of grief, that kind of weight, Leviticus, in my opinion, is a better book.
Okay.
Not Leviticus, Lamentations.
Okay.
Lamentations is about the grief of Israel and about being able to speak about your experience of pain, and reminders, constant reminders that God's there. Still, Job is pretty famous. A lot of people know it outside of even Christian circles and Jewish circles. It's a mainstream story that people kind of know, probably because it's so wild that you can't hear about it and not remember it.
Well, I think when you get out there, if you ask somebody, they know the gist of the story. If they don't know the whole story,
right?
Yeah, it's very well known.
Right. Right. Well, I think that finishes up our conversation for today. As far as our Where's Mike Mariani segment goes this week, I do want to lift out some prayers for Mike, because Lori recently went to the hospital, and thank God that she seems to be doing okay and is at home and doing well. But we do want to kind of lift them up and kind of ask God to watch over them. I'm not sure when we're going to do this again, but it will be soon, I think, because like I said, the Christmas season is upon us, and there's a lot of big questions that come with those scriptures and things of that nature. Actually, this Sunday, I'm doing a fourth Sunday sermon on, can God make a boulder so heavy that he can't lift it? Was a question that was in there. And
that's an interesting question.
Well, it's about what God cannot do, which is a subject we never really get into. And so it's going to be really interesting, I think. So thanks for listening to us. Make sure you leave any comments, any thoughts, any things that you have on this particular topic. Make sure you subscribe on any streaming platform you listen to us on. But in the meantime, come to the table. A place has been prepared for you.
All right.